What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Clarke Notes. I do want to keep a bit more of a specific focus. And I did say last time that I was going to talk a bit about teacher pay. I just keep finding it interesting that we keep kind of having the same loop, the same thoughts, the same things we're asking for, but we're not getting. So I will try to not just kind of review that entire debate. But I do want to unpack a little bit more about what I think teachers are not asking for, they should ask for, that I think that they would actually get, and that would actually help the profession overall. The first thing that I noticed is teachers often always ask for just like a blanket salary raise. And while I think this is obvious in what it does to the average teacher and their income, I do think that there are other ways that you can kind of put more money in a teacher's pocket without actually kind of vamping the entire. Mr. Clarke After Dark is brought to you by Luxy. That's Luxy. Luxy is the standard for modern dating, as it gives you a greater understanding of any potential match's intentions and background before you make your move. Swiping endlessly in other dating apps can be exhausting and often leave you with only the leftovers in your dating pool. Luxy is an exclusive platform with just a 10 to 15% acceptance rate, as well as a profile and income verification feature, so you can be confident you're only connecting with those who meet your high standards. The community guidelines emphasize safety, trust, and equality by strictly prohibiting scams, explicit content, and harassment. 2025 is your year to stop settling. With Luxy, there is no luck involved, just real connections with people who truly match what it is you are looking for. Download the Luxy app today to see if you qualify for a better chance at finding the right person for you. And now, back to the show. System. And that's what I think is actually what I'm trying to get at the heart of with some of the ideas. So, for example, I was kind of thinking, okay, if I'm at the table and I'm now asking for, like, I'm representing like at the ATA or the NBTA, and I'm talking to the government and I'm saying, this is what we want. And in a perfect world, that kind of makes sense because I do think it's underestimated or under considered how much teachers are actually hated in society. I think that does play a big role in the resistance of governments to accommodate these kind of financial requests. And so, for example, some of the stats that I've seen for trying to get Alberta or even any province kind of in par with inflation, as there hasn't been that many raises over the past 10, 15 years, usually ranges between like 20 and 30%. I know there was one teacher who said, or one principal I was talking to last year that said it would need to be like a 35% raise in our salary to give a raise and adjust for inflation. And now my mind goes to the politics side, where immediately, as soon as anyone in society sees that big of a raise for teachers, everyone just immediately shuts it down, let alone Alberta, where you have like I guess, whether you're a supporter of conservative governments or not. I know we have an election here literally on Monday for the federal government, but they are going to be more resistant to trying to expand any sort of left-wing type collectivist sector. So if you see a full union going for a 35% raise, that's immediately going to raise some red flags. And I think as a result, kind of immediately pushes back on the teachers, because now we're kind of just throwing off our back foot, to kind of put a football reference in there, where it's never going to be accurate, and everything from there kind of stumbles from these like dramatic requests. So some of the things that I've thought of, because I do think that the genuine goal for educators in teaching is that we want ways that we can keep a little bit more money in our own pockets. And I know that's like a common expression, but we also want to be compensated or even acknowledged. And I think it's more the acknowledged part here that I'm going to try and unpack a bit, where we know that we're not going to make $200,000 a year, even $150,000 a year. I know some upper level admin and district leaders can start to get into that financial range, but I know, for example, here in New Brunswick, we have Johnson Insurance, and personally, I've thought it's been not the best experience for me, but maybe there's something that I'm doing that's incorrect, or I'm not asking the right questions, and that's why I've had a bad experience. But what I do know is that it's very expensive. And going into teaching, I think one of the things that I was initially conditioned with was, when you go into teaching, like you got your good retirement, you've got your pension and your benefits. Like, you're not going to make the craziest salary, you're not going to make a mountain of money, but the core needs for you will kind of be met. And I've gone all year this year with no dental insurance, no health insurance. I made that decision because the more things I asked for, the more I saw come off my paycheck. When I guess you just assume these things are kind of baked into your contract when you sign. So I have not been to the dentist in a year. That's not uncommon for me though, but but I made that decision because I knew that that was something that would save me money. And that's going to save me $60, $70 a month that I'm not, or maybe even more, because I know some teachers in New Brunswick specifically, and this does apply to other provinces, where I didn't want to get insurance because it was expensive. And I know some people who, like a lot of female teachers, who would use their husband's benefits because their husband's benefits were free and actually included in their job, and they didn't pay anything. As far as I know, those are anecdotal sources, but I think the point here is that if I could just have insurance, and that was something that was negotiated, that, okay, now I got a couple $100 extra in my account that's not coming off of my check to pay for insurance, and my salary didn't actually increase. But now I've got a bit more in my pocket that I'm taking to then use for, that's a decent chunk of my truck payment. So these are things that you're not going to see the big number that everyone's going to be outraged by, but it's something that I think could be taken into account. Another thing that I've heard a lot about is days in lieu for coaching is kind of its own thing. But for me personally, like, for example, I did a PD earlier this year for my new district, and it was on a Sunday. So we got to go in for 6 hours, and it was like a Holocaust like professional development training. So I went to it. I loved it. It was fantastic. But we were told we could either be compensated for like 1 day of substitute pay for taking the Sunday to do that PD, or we could take 1 day in lieu. Now, I don't know. I think maybe there could be something that, even like, why couldn't a teacher have a formal signature that if you're going to coach X sport, you get like 0.5 days off, or you get 0.5 days in lieu, or you get 1.5 days in lieu if you coach like a big sport like basketball or volleyball, and then maybe have like a cap at 5 days per year if a guy or someone just likes to coach everything. But obviously you can't just have teachers out of the building all the time, which I do understand, but it doesn't necessarily need to be this massive ordeal to kind of just keep expecting more. And again, that's not actually raising the salary of that individual, nor do I think that that's going to cause outrage with a news article when you see a head coach for a volleyball team has taken the last 8 weekends to go out of town with his team, now gets 2 days in lieu for that sport. I think that's fair. And that's something that currently does not exist in a lot or even most jurisdictions, and doesn't cost any extra money. Now, it might cost some extra money in terms of the substitute pay that you then have to use for those 2 days. But again, I think that's pretty minimal when you're seeing someone make that commitment to trying to have students get these opportunities. That could also be something that's kind of put into student fees, if that's something that districts, and it's not the teacher's problem that money's not there. They're doing everything that they can, and we are looking for ways to make this be more sustainable, and that should definitely be something that's considered. 2 other ones that I've seen, nursing, I know for a lot, does retention bonuses. And like, for example, when I lived in Fort McMurray, as it was a northern community, when I was moving there was like the Northern Alberta Development Council. Mr. Clarke After Dark is brought to you by Alpha Progression. Looking to get out of your rut with the spring coming? If you're ready to stop plateauing and actually build a fitness plan that works with muscle that actually sticks, it is time for you to try Alpha Progression, an app made by lifters for lifters. This app is already making waves, as it has been twice named App of the Day by Apple and is currently the #1 rated fitness app in Germany. You get a custom training plan built from scratch based on your equipment, your goals, and the muscles you want to focus on, as there are over 1 trillion possible plan combinations. Alpha Progression doesn't just plan your workouts, it guides your progression set by set with its revolutionary personalized plan generator. It looks at your past performance and tells you exactly how much to lift and how many reps to hit, so you're always improving and never stuck in neutral. Also, you never have to carry that notebook around the gym ever again. The Pro version is currently $12.99 per month or $79.99 per year, and it also comes with a 2-week free trial. For my listeners, you can get 20% off your first payment when you use the link alphaprogression.com/MCAD. So if you're ready to finally break through and see some real progress, this spring is your moment. Hit that link, get the app, and get after it. And now, back to the show. So, in the NADC, there was an offer for public sector employees where I could sign up for 1 to 3 years, and there's two separate bursaries, which is like an incentive, obviously. One was $6,000 to commit for 1 year, one was $8,000 to commit for 2 years, which was a separate teaching one, and another one was 3 years for $16,000. I ended up getting the 1 year for $6,000, and so that was a geographically specifically targeted bursary for people to teach in that area. Obviously, I think we're kind of seeing that level of shortage almost everywhere in the country. So I do think a similar model could be applied. But I think, and I can understand the reasonable response with the current political will to say, no, we can't just dish out $1,000 to every teacher to come to our districts. We can't afford that. And I do understand that, even though you see like these billions and billions always being spent. But anyway, that's another thing. If I were to come, especially here in New Brunswick, like I've been told that we're in a teacher shortage here in New Brunswick. We are in the ASDS, especially. We're getting reports of like upwards of 1,000 teachers retiring in the next 3 to 5 years. And that is really cool in terms of seeing a path for opportunity. But I think if you want people to stay here and to come here and stay here, and that just applies to anywhere, it's like, okay, if you sign on for, okay, like we have a massive shortage in people who want to be in administration. No one wants to be a vice principal or a principal anymore. Well, if they come up to me and said, Lucas, you know what? Like if you sign on to this 5-year commitment to our district, we'll help or even fund your Masters of Educational Leadership. Now, me with my son, I guess, come on the way here in August, which I haven't actually talked about on here individually. Maybe I'll talk about that at the end. $1,000 over a 2-year span, 2.5-year span, that goes a long way in terms of things that I don't have to think about, but I'm still kind of growing in my career. I'm seeing an acknowledgement of my rewarding my loyalty. And again, I'm using myself here as the example, but you're seeing that as a way to retain your teachers. And like, honestly, if I'm planning on living here for the rest of my life anyway, why would you not try to encourage that type of behavior? Again, 0 actual raise in my salary, but then 3 years from now, that means I save $200 a month on insurance and I save $10,000 total for paying for a master's degree. And then whoever, it would be myself in this scenario, gets a raise if I was fortunate enough to ever get a VP or leadership or other type of leadership position. Well, then you've got like $15,000, $20,000 more in the account than you didn't have. And that's actually there's literally no percentage increase in that entire thing. So I do think that kind of boils down to this, like, you know what? No, we're going to go with and I do understand. Even right now, I think if I was in Alberta's shoes, like I would probably be shooting for like a 7 to 10% raise, but with more money in your pocket or with an acknowledgement of career growth, because lifelong learning is expected of us. So why would you not kind of build that into the incentive structure? I guess maybe that makes too much sense for me. So yeah, retention bonuses, even like maybe 10, 15 years in, you get 5,000. Like we're getting nothing right now other than maybe a fancy meal at the end of your every 5th, 10th, and 15th and 20th year. I mean, that's cool. It's fun, but like that's just another outing where I kind of just get to hang out. You get acknowledged, but you don't actually, it's not incentivized by any means. So, and if you want to look at ways, and I think this is the biggest one that I've thought about a lot when I think about if I was ever in a position to try and design these types of arrangements or agreements or collective agreements where When I moved to New Brunswick specifically, and I've heard that this is being talked about, something that they're going to remove is that they actually have step A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And I think there's 10 or 11 letters on those. But step A, you actually stay on for 2 full years, which I didn't know when I moved here. But then once you get here, like, so pretty much every 195th teaching day, you get like you get bumped down to the next one on the salary grid. So and really the raise is like $40 biweekly. It's nothing crazy every year, and obviously over 12 years that adds up. But I remember like, oh, like I should be on this step, but I was on another step, but that it kind of got very confusing because like you spend certain amount of years on some sets, but not on others. But it was kind of a poop show, I think. But I think if you have it set up in a way that I do think the current salary incentive structure in education, and I think everyone would agree with me here, is that you incentivize good teachers out of the classroom, which does not make sense. And I think the core issue here is why can't a 45-year-old teacher with 22 years of experience make more than your 32-year-old administrator? So, for example, if you start teaching at 22, then you're 33 years old, you've kind of maxed out on your 11-year grid. Maybe you've gotten your master's and now you're a vice principal. And the same person who's now 45 with 13 or 14 years more experience is actually making less money than you. And to me, I think that kind of there should be a reason for that person who's 45 years old, who has mastered their curriculum, is comfortable with their school, knows what they're doing, to not be like, you know what, now my kid's going to university, I need to go take an administration job, or I need to do something to find extra money because now I want to do these things with my family that are different, but you can't stay in the classroom anymore. I do think that the easiest fix to that would be if you've got your salary grid, you've got your 1 to 10th year, you've got your years of education. I think that there should be extra years added on the grid as you complete your master's. So, for example, if you know what, I'm content, I'm just going to do my 4-year degree. I don't ever want to do extra like formalized education. And that means that I finish at year 11. That's fine. Like I can stay there. I'll make that salary till I retire. That's cool. That's up to you. But I do think that if you were to get your master's, there should almost be like a year 12, 13, 14, and 15. And again, as someone for myself, I do potentially want to pursue like a social studies curriculum and instruction master's and potentially a doctorate down the road, maybe even potentially leadership. Why couldn't there also be like that another step for if you get your educational doctorate or a PhD to have 12, 13, 14, 15, and then 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So to me, it's like, okay, that means if I could get 20 raises over 20 years while getting my doctorate, but also staying in a K to 12 classroom. Obviously, most people who get their doctorate would then go on to teach for the most part at the university level. But why couldn't I make on par with a high school principal when I'm 48 years old with a doctorate? And then maybe also teach some courses at a university or something. And now you might think, oh, well, then what would be the incentive structure of being a principal? Well, it's like, exactly. I think those people are being underpaid anyway. So that can kind of actually, in doing that, you don't actually change the amount of money that teachers are making, but you acknowledge and incentivize and reward people who stay in the same districts, people who continue to bring their expertise to the classroom and actually engage in lifelong learning. Either you're going to have people that like, they want to move around, they want to teach all over the world. That's fine. They can go to the different places, do their own thing. And then they wouldn't get those retention bonuses, or they wouldn't get they wouldn't kind of be entitled to the same types of incentives that you currently see. And I think you can kind of go down the rabbit hole even further of like senior teachers, for the most part, actually typically look for easier schedules. And that's part of like the gaining clout at your school, is actually kind of being able to chill, pick your own schedule and make it a bit more chill. But I think if you found a way to kind of make the more difficult courses or grades that you teach actually more, like for example, if I'm teaching English 30-1 in Alberta, that could be actually like 1.3 courses. I get acknowledged with potentially more prep time in my day but nothing actually changes in my salary. So these are just a few things that I think that we can, and you know what? Again, I'm kind of coming from a naive place here where I'm not involved in these collective agreement discussions, and maybe these things are being floated out there, but I just don't see them. But it is something that I've noticed is these are all things that I never actually see in like the day-to-day kind of social media rants, and it's things that I never hear discussed around the table. I think it always comes from the like we haven't had a net X raise in 12 years, which I understand, and I think the government themselves have kind of shot themselves in the foot. And I'm speaking generally here about governments because it is pretty much for the most part that most teachers unions have not received any kind of steady raises over the past decade in Canada, where now that we're getting to this point, there's not actually enough funds available to kind of do that massive to actually keep it in line with what they should have already been earning. But now we're kind of moving into this crazy part where we're trying to get the big raise kind of get adjusted for what we've always been doing, but at the same time trying to make teaching a bit more of a flexible profession in the sense of being similar to other corporate jobs. Like I know, for example, they piloted potentially like the 4-day instructional week here in New Brunswick, and immediately it was just torn apart by the media, and our district leadership here in New Brunswick and at the NBTA just like immediately dismissed it, said, oh, we can't do this. But I think there are things that we can build into our schedule that it does not necessarily have to be this like overall blanket $1 billion raise that or $1 billion increase. Like I know, for example, in Alberta, I think there's like 50,000 teachers. And if you were to give 50,000 teachers a $20,000 raise on average with this bump, like if you were to do like a 35% bump, like that's $1 billion. So I do understand there can be this pressure to not like completely vamp the entire system. But I do think there are so many ways that we can actually incentivize people for staying in their positions, and not just staying in their positions for the sake of staying, but like finding ways to reward them for actually getting better at their job and not becoming complacent with something that they're comfortable with, but you're actually forcing them to say, you know what, like if I'm 42 years old and I know that I can finish my doctorate and make another $20,000 a year once my kids start to go to university in a few years, I'm going to do it. But then some people might be like, you know what, I'm content to stay. Like I like where I am. But you give a bit more of that choice to providing, I think, better quality, long-term, steady incentives for educators that want to stay in the profession. Because I think for the most part, if you're looking at any sort of corporate job, by the time you're 50 and 55 years old, if you've been in a company for a long time, like you're probably teetering around the 180, 200 plus range in a lot of those white collar professions. And so why can't there at least be some sort of acknowledgement of this kind of lifelong wage increase for teachers? So yeah, that's kind of my rant, a bit of just some things I was thinking about here. But I do think that especially in New Brunswick, we get like 1 personal day per year. In Alberta, we get 2 personal days per year, but that also changes from district to district, not just as a union. Honestly, I think if you were to change that to just maybe kind of reducing the sick days in some part, but also giving like 5 flex days per year where I can take these days to do PD, or I can take them to like someone who's not a practicing Christian can actually take their religious holidays without needing to take a personal day, or knowing that there are so many ways that we can actually revamp the incentive structures for teachers to continue to earn more money, which would then, I think, leave more people engaged and actually staying in the profession. When by the time you reach 40 years old and you've maxed out, there's a lot of professions that will kind of ask you to hop on over with your skills, and I guess maybe keep doing the good work is what I'm wondering. But and speaking of, I know it's time here in New Brunswick as well for starting to reapply for positions. So I'll be going on about that here. I think next month I'll just see how this month goes with the cover letters and the resume and all that stuff going out. So hopefully this time next month or month after, I'll know what I'm kind of doing next year for when for when we actually have my first child coming. So yeah, Cassie and I are expecting our first one here in August. So I'm a little bit nervous for trying to change my teaching career once again, of going from Fort Mac to New Brunswick and leaving the school that I'm currently at for next year is daunting. I think no matter, I think personally, I've been very open from it from the start. I don't think I'm good at my job currently, which is kind of a slice of humble pie for me, because I did feel that whatever I did used to do at my old school, I felt like generally competent, but I think there needs to be an understanding that you're not going to be good at everything in a profession. And I think there's times to accept that you're in over your head. And people have told me I'm doing a good job, and I hope they're right. And I hope that maybe I'm just overthinking it. But I do think I think I belong in a rambunctious high school. I think McTavish gave me that from the outset, and I'm looking to hopefully get back into the here in New Brunswick. So I know I've been talking to a lot of teachers lately, because when we're looking at applying for jobs for next year, honestly, the next position I want to go into, like the school I go to, is where I want to be forever. I do think that the dream for me would be 5, 10 years from now, I'm teaching history every day, maybe doing a little bit of support work, doing the podcast still, but also being a part of those kind of big community events, which I think you just don't quite get the same way at the elementary and middle school level. I know that when I have a small child, I won't be able to do kind of, not that don't think I was ever a good coach by any means, but you just can't commit the same level of time, which is understandable. And that kind of plays into my earlier discussion of days in lieu. Like maybe if I did want to coach a lot more next year and I knew I could get 2 or 3 days potentially down the road to take with my family to kind of make up for that lost time, that could definitely aid in kind of keeping your younger teachers who are still involved when they're starting their families to actually stay a bit more engaged and still be able to, maybe I can leave on Saturday, come back Sunday morning, but then I can take Monday as a day in lieu and actually help around the house. But that is a dream world for another day. So for this month, I think coming up here, I should be having Bernie Godwin and Tyler Tarver and Dr. Selena Fisk. And I do believe my good friend Kyle Harkwill as the episodes for May. Harkwill is someone that I've been working with here in New Brunswick, and him and I have become great friends. And we actually have not recorded it yet, so I'm looking forward to doing that one with him. And the only two that I actually currently do have recorded with Tyler Tarver and Bernie Godwin, who will be the next two coming out. And Bernie was awesome. She's a author of the Loving Our Students on Purpose philosophy down in Australia. And Tyler Tarver is a great teacher from Arkansas. He's like a director of leadership and curriculum. Yeah, I think you guys will enjoy that conversation. He's also like a YouTuber where he trades cards, so it was kind of a funny, kind of random discussion that we had at times. But I do want to hear what you guys think. Maybe I'm way off in some of these things that I'm asking for. I do know, if you've watched some of the podcasts, that the episodes that I've done with Danielle Denis, who was the leader, the president for Coopy, for a group that just went on strike, like even in talking to her about, and I know the EAs are different than like the ATA, and it's a very different type of work, but none of these things were ever discussed in that either. Like none of the days in lieu or like alternative incentive structures. Like it's pretty rigid. You get what you get and don't even think about asking for more. And I think the entire reason why this was even interesting to me as an episode to create is that teachers are going to find different ways to make that extra money. Like if I'm even looking at doing some tutoring, or I'm thinking about making a diploma preparation course for social studies in Alberta that I can potentially do in the evenings to help tutor students with that. So it's like, but again, if I'm making whatever that extra insurance money, or I know my master's is going to be covered, like maybe I actually spend a bit more time specifically thinking about like how I can just improve what I do every day rather than trying to find ways to make extra money. Again, not that I'm not, by no means am I struggling, but like that just seems to be the narrative of every teacher I talk to, where it's like the slush fund, where those are things that you do outside of school to kind of pony up a little extra cash here and there, when I think like there's so much opportunity of what we can already adapt, what we're already doing, I think can be a big help. Yeah, so let me know if you've heard of any other cool ideas of people reaching out with different ideas of how to like improve teacher retention and all that stuff. But also, I would love to hear about what you guys put in your education cover letters. I just rewrote mine to start applying again for next year, and I would just be curious to see what other people are putting in theirs. But anyway, Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Clarke Notes. Make sure to download, subscribe, and don't be scared to catch the episode on Tuesday. See you guys.